300 men chose to die here, not by accident, not because they were trapped. They chose it with full knowledge of what was coming days in advance, with an escape route sitting open behind them the entire time. And what happened in this narrow strip of land over the course of 3 days in the late summer of 480 BC didn't just become one of the most retold stories in military history. It fundamentally changed the outcome of a war that determined whether Greek civilization, the civilization that would go on to give the world democracy, philosophy, and the foundations of Western thought, survived at all, or was absorbed permanently into the largest empire the world had ever seen. This is the story of Thermopylae, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why losing this battle may have mattered more than winning it. If stories like this pull you in, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from. It helps this channel reach more people who love this stuff. Now, let's set the stage. By 480 BC, the Persian Empire under King Xerxes I was the largest and most powerful state the world had ever seen, stretching from the Indus River in the east to the edge of the Aegean Sea in the west, ruling over dozens of subject peoples, commanding resources no single Greek city-state could remotely match. 10 years earlier, Xerxes' father, Darius, had tried to punish the Greek city-states, Athens in particular, for supporting a rebellion against Persian rule in Ionia. That invasion ended in a shocking defeat at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, a humiliation Persia had never forgotten and fully intended to correct. Xerxes didn't make his father's mistake of underestimating the Greeks. He spent years preparing what ancient historian Herodotus describes as one of the largest military mobilizations in ancient history. A multi-year project building a massive pontoon bridge across Hellespont to march his army directly from Asia into Europe, and cutting an entire canal through the Mount Athos Peninsula so his fleet wouldn't have to risk the storms that had wrecked a previous Persian fleet years before. Herodotus's ancient figures for the invasion force, sometimes cited as over 1 million men, are almost certainly wildly exaggerated, the kind of number ancient writers used to convey overwhelming scale rather than precise head count. Modern historians estimate the actual invasion force at somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 soldiers. Still an almost incomprehensible number for the ancient world, and still vastly larger than anything Greece could field in response. This wasn't an empire testing the waters. This was an empire that intended, this time, to end the question of Greek independence permanently. Here's the problem the Greeks faced before a single battle was even fought. There was no unified Greece to defend it. There were dozens of fiercely independent city-states, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and many smaller ones, with a long history of fighting each other as often as cooperating. Some Greek states, seeing the size of what was coming, chose to submit to Persia rather than face annihilation. Others stayed neutral, waiting to see which way the war would break. But a coalition of city-states, led jointly by Athens and Sparta, the two dominant powers, each bringing something the other lacked, decided to resist. The strategic problem facing this coalition was brutal in its simplicity. Persia's army was too large to defeat in open battle on flat ground, where its numbers could fully deploy and its cavalry could operate freely. The Greeks needed a choke point, a place narrow enough that Persian numbers stopped mattering, where a smaller, disciplined force could hold a line that couldn't be outflanked. They found it at Thermopylae, a narrow pass on Greece's eastern coast, so tight in places that, according to ancient sources, a loaded cart could barely pass through, squeezed between steep mountains on one side and the sea on the other. If Persia's massive army wanted to march south into central Greece by land, it had to come through here. The plan was straightforward on paper: hold the pass long enough to buy time, while the combined Greek navy engaged the Persian fleet nearby at Artemisium, preventing Persian ships from simply sailing around the blockage and landing troops behind the defenders. Time was the entire strategy. Every day the pass held was a day Greek city-states further south had to prepare, evacuate, or reconsider surrender. Here's where the famous number needs some honest context, because it's the part most retellings simplify past the point of accuracy. Sparta was in the middle of celebrating the sacred Carneia festival, a religious observance, during which, by Spartan law and custom, military campaigns were forbidden. Similarly, much of the rest of Greece was observing the Olympic truce around the same period. According to Herodotus, Sparta initially intended to wait until the religious restrictions lifted before sending its main army north. But the threat was too immediate to wait. So Sparta's king, Leonidas I, took a smaller force, 300 Spartiates, the elite full citizens of Sparta, all of whom, according to Herodotus, were men who already had living sons, meaning their family lines wouldn't end with them. and marched north immediately, ahead of the main army, as what was essentially a symbolic advance guard meant to rally other Greek forces and hold the line until reinforcements could legally follow. And this is the detail worth sitting with. Leonidas wasn't alone with 300 men against an empire. He was joined by roughly 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, and several thousand additional troops from other allied city-states, bringing the total initial Greek defensive force at Thermopylae to somewhere around 7,000 men, according to most modern historical estimates drawn from Herodotus's account. The 300 became the legend because of what happened in the battle's final phase, but the full story includes thousands of Greeks who stood in that pass, and it includes one group in particular whose choice deserves far more recognition than it usually gets. We'll get there. When the Persian army arrived and saw the size of the force blocking their path, Xerxes reportedly sent a scout ahead to assess the Greek position, and according to Herodotus, the scout returned with a strange report. The Spartans were calmly exercising and combing their long hair, seemingly unbothered by the approaching army. This wasn't bravado for its own sake. Among Spartans, grooming one's hair before battle was a known ritual, a signal of readiness to fight and, if necessary, to die with dignity. Xerxes, unfamiliar with Spartan custom, reportedly found the report so strange he waited 4 full days before attacking, assuming the small force would simply flee once it grasped the scale of what was coming. They didn't. When the attack finally came, the geography of Thermopylae did exactly what the Greeks had hoped. The pass was too narrow for Persia to bring its numerical advantage to bear. Only a limited number of soldiers could engage the Greek line at any given moment, funneled into a space where their superior numbers simply couldn't matter. Wave after wave of Persian infantry, including Xerxes' elite guard known as the Immortals, attacked the Greek position and were pushed back, unable to break the disciplined, heavily armored hoplite formation fighting on ground that favored defense over aggression. For 2 full days, the vastly larger Persian force made essentially no progress. Then, on the 3rd day, the battle turned, not through Persian strength, but through betrayal. A local Greek man named Ephialtes, seeking reward from Xerxes, revealed the existence of a narrow mountain path that circled behind the Greek position, allowing Persian forces to bypass the pass entirely and attack the defenders from the rear. When Leonidas learned the mountain path had been compromised and Persian forces were moving to encircle the pass, he made a decision that turned this battle from a military engagement into something that would echo for the next 2,500 years. He dismissed the bulk of the Greek allied force. Thousands of soldiers from various city-states were sent south, away from the pass, to preserve them for the coming defense of the rest of Greece. There was no strategic value left in a full-scale last stand. The position was compromised. The mission, in purely tactical terms, was over. But Leonidas and his 300 Spartans stayed. And they weren't alone in that choice. The roughly 700 Thespians, soldiers from the small city of Thespiae, chose to stay as well entirely voluntarily, with no Spartan obligation compelling them to. Their city faced no religious festival restriction, no ancient law demanding this sacrifice. They stayed anyway, standing beside men from a rival city-state in a battle they knew by that point could not be won. Roughly 400 Thebans also remained, though ancient sources, including Herodotus, suggest their position was more complicated. Some accounts indicate they may have been kept back partly against their full will, given Thebes' uncertain loyalties in the wider war. Historians still debate exactly how voluntary the Theban stand was. What's not in dispute is that men from at least 2 other Greek cities chose or were compelled to stand with the Spartans in the battle's final, hopeless phase. Why stay when the strategic purpose was already gone? The most historically grounded answer isn't about heroism as spectacle. It's about what this stand was actually buying: time and a message. Every hour the rearguard held at Thermopylae was another hour for the retreating Greek forces to get clear, another hour for the rest of Greece to see that this war could be resisted, and, perhaps most importantly, for a culture that valued reputation and legacy as deeply as Sparta did, a demonstration broadcast across the entire Greek world that surrender was not the only option available against Persia's power. On the 3rd day's final phase, surrounded from both directions, the remaining Greek force moved out from the narrow wall they'd been defending behind and met the Persian advance in open engagement, a final, deliberate choice to inflict maximum casualties before being overwhelmed rather than simply waiting to be surrounded and destroyed passively. Herodotus records that Leonidas was killed during this final engagement, and that a fierce struggle broke out over control of his body, with Greek defenders reportedly repelling Persian attempts to seize it multiple times before being finally overwhelmed. According to Herodotus, once ammunition and functional weapons were exhausted, the last defenders fought with whatever remained: broken spears, swords, and according to the more dramatic ancient accounts, even bare hands and teeth, until the position was completely overrun. Every Spartan who remained in that final stand died. Every Thespian who chose to stay died alongside them. Xerxes, ancient sources report, was furious enough at the cost this small force had inflicted on his army, and reportedly at Leonidas's defiance specifically, that he ordered the Spartan king's body mutilated and his head displayed, an act ancient Greek writers considered a serious violation of normal conduct toward a fallen enemy, and one that, if anything, only reinforced the Greek narrative of Persian excess against Greek honor. Here's the part of the story that gets lost in the myth of glorious defeat. Thermopylae was, by any strict military measure, a loss. The pass fell. The Persian army marched south. Athens itself was evacuated and burned. But the delay Leonidas and his men purchased, those 3 days of holding an army of staggering size at a dead stop, followed by the psychological and strategic value of the stand itself, gave the rest of Greece critical time to prepare a naval strategy that would prove far more decisive than any land battle could have been. Weeks after Thermopylae fell, the Athenian statesman Themistocles lured the massive Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis, where, just as at Thermopylae, Persia's numerical advantage became a liability rather than a strength, and the more maneuverable Greek ships inflicted a decisive, war-altering defeat on the Persian navy. Xerxes, watching his fleet destroyed and his supply lines suddenly vulnerable, returned to Persia with the bulk of his forces, leaving a reduced army under his general Mardonius to continue the campaign. That remaining force was decisively defeated the following year at the Battle of Plataea, ending the Persian invasion of mainland Greece for good. None of that, not Salamis, not Plataea, not the survival of Greek independence, happens the same way without the time Thermopylae bought, and without the psychological shift the stand created across the Greek world. Proof that Persia's army, however massive, could be made to bleed and could be made to stall. And that survival mattered far beyond Greece's own borders. The following century and a half saw the flourishing of Athenian democracy, the philosophy of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and cultural and intellectual foundations that would go on to shape Roman civilization, and through it, the entire trajectory of Western political and philosophical thought. None of that guarantees it couldn't have developed some other way under Persian rule. History doesn't work in guaranteed counterfactuals, but the Greece that actually produced it was a Greece that stayed independent, and that independence was purchased, in real and direct part, in a narrow pass by men who understood they weren't going home. Today, a monument stands at Thermopylae inscribed with words attributed to the poet Simonides, memorializing the Spartans who died there, a message describing men who obeyed their laws and stayed at their post. It's one of the most quoted epitaphs in military history, and it's usually remembered as being about the 300 alone. But the fuller, more accurate story is bigger than 300 men, and in some ways more remarkable for it, a coalition of rival Greek cities, some bound by law, some staying by pure choice with nothing forcing them to, buying 3 days that changed the outcome of a war whose result still echoes through the political and philosophical traditions much of the modern world was built on. They didn't win the battle, they changed what came after it. If this gave you a deeper appreciation for what actually happened at Thermopylae, hit like, subscribe if you're not already, and let me know in the comments. Do you think the Thespians who chose to stay deserve just as much recognition as the 300 Spartans? And tell me which historic battle you want covered next.